guys, how you doing today? Dan, the Jazz Shepherd. Oh, it's cool old Spirits of St. Louis ABA jersey. Charles Limerick's playing, of course. Moses Malone. Today we're going to talk to Bossa Nova. I love Bossa Nova. And people who are avant-garde guys don't think it's jazzy. People who like free jazz think it's pop. I'm going to counter that by saying this is the last wave of jazz music. And I'll say that because of its commercial appeal. And to me, jazz was always a music that was foot tappable, sensual, sexual, and appealing. And the last great craze of commercial success for jazz is the Bossa Nova. In 62, 63, it takes over, and it's everywhere across the nation, from giant labels to the smallest labels. Everyone's trying to cash in on this new sound, and a lot of these records sold really well, especially for jazz records. And so in some ways, you can see the swing era go into the bebop era, the bebop era goes into the hard bop era, the modern jazz is happening, but this is like the last gasp of jazz finding a new sound that really appealed to a lot of people. And jazz after the Bossa Nova, it becomes such a fractured thing that there's no unity whatsoever. There's no cross promotion from camp to camp. There's such division even between the various camps in jazz that it further isolates and alienates the entire jazz community, and what was once the nation's music becomes a nation for underground beatniks, acid freaks, and stoned hippies. You know, the music just falls by the wayside in such a great way that it's very sad. Bossa Nova is very important, and of course Charlie Bird and Stan Getz are equally responsible for the success of the Bossa Nova. This record together on Creed Taylor's Verve Records solidly announced the arrival of not just Verve Records, not just Creed Taylor's new idea for jazz, but it also announces the arrival of the Bossa Nova, a rejuvenation of especially Stan Getz's career, and these records sold well, like I said. And Verve Records, it kind of validates what Creed Taylor is trying to do. I want this music to be successful, commercial, and they're so successful with this that Verve, much beyond the Bossa Nova era, is still releasing Bossa Nova records, and they're all actually really good. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you first a lot of what Verve does, and then we'll discuss a few of the other things that the other labels do. This is Stan Getz with the big band Bossa Nova, conducted and arranged by Gary McFarland. It's a great record. The trombone jazz samba with Bobby Brookmeyer, Bossa Nova. I love this record. It's a bit of a tougher one to come by. And you think to yourself, does trombone lend itself to the Bossa Nova? You bet it does. You bet it does. Again, you have the wonderful gatefolds, beautiful artwork and packaging. Jim Hall's on this record on the guitar, Jimmy Rainey's on the guitar, Gary McFarland on the vibes, Willie Bobo on the Latin drums, Carmen Costa on the cabasa, and Jose Paulo on tambourine. Latin jazz, Bossa Nova, there's kind of a crossover there at points, and they certainly both fill a niche, but the real Bossa Nova from this era, to me, is outstanding. Beautiful, dreamy, ocean breezes. Another great important name in the Bossa Nova, another Brazilian by the name of Louis Bonfa. And Bonfa's another great guitar player. And the Bossa Nova has that shuffle. Voz do Of course, Antonio Carlos Jobim and João Gilberto are two of the real progenitors of the art form. But a lot of people contributed to it, and from my understanding, this guy was one of the originators as well in Brazil. He does a lot of composing as well, and it's a tough record to find, and it kind of can be a little expensive. It's probably one of the more expensive Verve Bossa Nova records out there. Most Verves you can find from 10 to 20, 25 bucks. I find that when you're lucky to find in that price range. Here's Stan Getz with Louis Bonfa in that same series. We're talking 85-23. So a lot of the stuff comes out fairly rapidly in succession. It just starts taking over the recording studio where Verve is tracking. And I think, if I recall right, Verve is tracking on the East Coast and the West Coast at this point. Here's another Bob Brookmeyer record. And here he's playing with Lalo Schifrin, another great Brazilian arranger. Fantastic stuff. They're playing at tempo here. A lot of the standards that are in Bossa Nova, you'll hear over and over again. Corcovado, One Note Samba, Desafinado. You'll hear those tracks almost on every Bossa Nova record, it seems like. But again, that shuffle's so wonderful. The trombone really is a great instrument to play Bossa Nova with because it's smooth. It's caramely. That rich, thick tone of the trombone just kind of shuffles and glides over the Bossa Nova just wonderfully. I'm not going to play nothing from this because we all know this one. This has Stan Getz with João Gilberto, and of course it's got the girl from Ipanema on here. That's pretty universal in every soundtrack that's ever had a beach scene. That song will show up, as it should. It's a wonderful, wonderful song. Now this is a record I think should be in every collection. These songs all show up in movie soundtracks time after time after time. This is the great Antonio Carlos Jobim, the guy who composed Desafinado. Here he's playing a lot of those great songs. Corcovado, Girl from Ipanema, Agua de Beber, Jazz Samba, One Note Samba, Desafinado. Like, he's a really important figure in the history of the Bossa Nova. And that sounds like trombone right there, maybe even French horn. But it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And again, it's got this commercial appeal. Jazz is selling. Jazz is something that you could talk to somebody in a coffee shop and they'd be like, oh yeah, I heard that. Oh yeah, I know that. But that language doesn't exist for most of the rest of what's happening in jazz in the 60s. You can't walk into a coffee shop and talk about Kenny Dorham with people. Sadly. You can't walk in there and talk about Lee Morgan or Hank Mobley with most people. Maybe after Sidewinder. You know, it's very much been relegated to isolated pockets. But this music had that broad appeal. It had that reach. And Verve had the power to get these records in every Kmart and Sears and record store from coast to coast. And on some ways, the lack of blackness made it real easy to market this and sell it in spite of its ethnicity, in spite of its not American roots. It didn't reflect the ugly history that we kind of bear. You know what I mean? On some way you listen to black jazz music, you have to connect and touch and feel some of the sorrow that our people inflicted on their people. And I think a lot of people shy away from jazz because they don't like the way that makes them feel. Beautiful, just beautiful. Stan Getz, of course, reinvents himself here. That's important to understand, is that Getz comes directly from the bebop Parker school And if you listen to his early Roost stuff, this Verve early stuff, he's a fiery player who plays a lot at tempo. But once he gets to the Bossa Nova, becomes this light, airy player that really kind of redefines the sound. This is Gary McFarland, Soft Samba, who does a lot of arranging and recording at Verve and at Impulse in the 60s. Here he's capturing the Bossa Nova sound and making what's really a nice dinner cocktail record. I think the Bossa Nova should be celebrated. I think all jazz collections should have Bossa Nova in them. This is Joao Gilberto's daughter, Astrud. She makes a number of records on Verve, all the way up until the end of the 8000 series. She's still putting records out. There's probably 6, 7, or 8 of them, and I like most of them. She's got a bit of a limited vocal range, and even her emoting's a little bit stoic. You don't feel the guts of Ella or Billy or Sarah Vaughan when she sings, but what she's singing has a different context to it. There's another one of her records. I love her, but for very different reasons than what I love those other gals for. It's just a summer rain. And the only time you don't appreciate a summer rain is when you're in the summer rain. If it's cold as fuck outside or hot as hell outside, you will take the summer rain. This is the great Walter Wanderley. And Walter Wanderley brings to the Bossa Nova the organ. And in the process, reshapes what the Bossa Nova could be. This song is fairly omnipresent. I feel like shows when I was a kid would use this almost as an interlude song between two different parts of something. It's just so nice. Wouldn't it be so nice? Wonderful stuff. Again, it's going to have that context of laid back Brazilian beach music that's got a lot of playing to it. It's not too heavy because the times weren't that heavy. I think a lot of the stress of the American lifestyle isn't omnipresent. I think if you lived in Rio and went down to the beaches of Ipanema in the 60s, your experience as a human was quite different than that of the average American, driven by Vietnam and civil strife and the conflicts of capitalism and the Cold War. I don't think most of the rest of the world lived in that reality. And so when you step into this Brazilian mindset, that's expressing kind of a different experience of the human experience on the planet. And I think that's part of its appeal, is there's so much tension, so much ugly, so much pain, so much hurt. And this music came along with great improvisation, but it was expressing a hopeful distraction, which is partly why I've been making a lot of videos on my channel lately. I want to be a hopeful distraction to people for what's going on now. This is, of course, with the great Laurindo Almeida, who's a great guitar player. Stan Getz once again. So Verve, you'll see, just keeps churning out record after record. I think that's Gilberto with Wanderley. It is. Another Walter Lee Wanderley record. He's got a lot of records that go pretty much right up to the end of the 8800 sequence for Verve. When Verve comes to kind of a screeching halt. Here's Bola Sete. This is at Monterey. Bola Sete also has a few records on the Fantasy label, the West Coast label. Another great guitar player, playing an interesting instrument there. Looks like it's some kind of a 12-string guitar or something, maybe. Another great player, another guy that really captures the sound of the sand. And then one more guy I want to show you from the Verve stuff. And so it's like Verve is really the leader when it comes to the Bossa Nova in so many ways. Their reach is so broad. Their power economically was so big. And don't get me wrong, the other labels really jump on board and make some great Bossa stuff. But Verve is really the home of the Bossa Nova. This is a guy named Baralimpa Luis Enrique, another great guitar player. Just, see, let's not stress about that right now. Let's have a good time. To show you how broad the Bossa Nova became, this is the great chairman of the board. And for my money, this might be my favorite Sinatra record. It puts him in a setting that's contemplative, a lot of space to emote. There's not these big Nelson Riddle horns and blaring in arrangements. There's not these really fast tempos. It's kind of laid back and allows his instrument to speak. I just can't tell you how beautiful this entire record is. It's with Antonio Carlos Jobim. I want to keep talking over because this is the one I'm worried about the YouTube bots finding and sampling and cutting out. I want to have to edit this out. You need to have this record, period. If you're going to have one Sinatra record, start with the greatest hits record that covers the classic stuff on Capitol, maybe a reprise collection. But then for albums, you need this. This shows you the versatility of Frank, the expressing emotive nature of Frank. His instrument is really unparalleled. One of the great singers. And it's just a gorgeous song. A little bit of a departure from the laid-back nature of the Bossa Nova is Quincy Jones' take on it. He really kind of brightens it up, puts horns in it. He adds a silly British spy to the mix. Of course, Austin Powers famously uses this for that great dance opening, probably in the first film. But this is Quincy Jones from like 1963. And it's hard not to see Austin Powers when you hear this, which... fair enough. Great choice, Mike Myers, on using Quincy Jones. But again, this is rooted firmly in the Bossa Nova, and this record has a pretty wide range. And it's fun hearing Quincy's take on it all. An instrument that lends itself wonderfully to the Bossa Nova is the flute. And this is the great Herbie Mann, who has an incredibly long career, makes records on almost every major jazz label, and honestly, I think people today underappreciate this guy. Yaz flute, as Will Ferrell once said, is not to be laughed at. It's a serious thing, and he really is a host of butterflies at times. Just a wonderful guy. Of course, you can see the Redeemer statue, Sugarloaf Mountain there in the background of Ben Rio. And this is with João Gilberto. So, again, the credibility is there. So a record definitely worth seeking out. This is on Fantasy Records. I'm sorry, on Pacific Records. Bud Shank and Lorenzo Almeida. And again, it really captures that feel. I think Lorenzo Almeida adds a bit of a Spanish, almost flamenco touch to what he's doing. Ramsey Lewis at Argo does what's a fine Bossa Nova record. One of the ones that was toughest for me to come by was this Kenny Burrell record. There's a number of guitar players on this record, including Barry Galbraith, including a guy named Buddy Pizzarelli or something like that. Bucky Pizzarelli, yep. Milt Hinton, Ozzie Johnson. But This is on the Cap label, which doesn't have a lot of jazz on it, but this is great stuff. Love this record dearly. It's top of the mark Bossa Nova. To me, few people were positioned to do Bossa Nova better than Paul Desmond. And we know, of course, Paul Desmond from his work with Dave Brubeck and that great quartet. But Desmond's light alto playing over top of the Bossa Nova groove, it's heavenly. It's angelic. Desmond's just a very beautiful, beautiful player. I'm not sure who's on the guitar. Jim Hall's on the guitar on that. So you got a couple of real greats there. Just floating stuff, man. Billowy clouds. That's billowy clouds on a sunny day. Impulse label dives right in to the Bossa Nova, and they have, of course, the great Coleman Hawkins, and he makes this record for the Impulse label probably in '63. And again, most of the meat of the Bossa Nova stuff is 62, 63, 64. But Desafinado, One Note Samba, Four Leaf Clover, Samba Parabene, a lot of the same songs are going to show up. Barry Galbraith's on the guitar on this. Major Hawley, Howard Collins, Tommy Flanagan. Beautiful, beautiful luxury gatefold. It's just wonderful packaging. So you see that Impulse is definitely saying, okay, yeah, let's capture that. And then equally important, the hard bop labels are seeing the writing on the wall. And keeping a record label afloat requires on some level for you to keep up with the times. And so Blue Note launches a couple of the great Bossa Nova records. This one with Ike Quebec, Soul Samba, one of my favorite records ever. You could play this record back to back to back to back 3-4 times, and you just had a great vacation. You didn't leave the house, didn't spend $1, but you had a great time. The Bossa Nova, Charlie Rouse, of course, of Jazz Mode fame, playing with Monk a long time. He makes this great tenor sax Bossa Nova record on Blue Note, and I'm just for time's sake I'm going to not show you that, but that's a record definitely worth seeking out. Prestige jumps in the mix, and they get the great Willis Jackson, who's pretty much a soul jazz guy, and he brings Prestige some great success with the Bossa Nova, and they sell a great deal of records. You'll find this record in a lot of places. I used to find this in record stores for years and years and years. You'd see this record over and over. Sold really well. And that doesn't mean it's not to be desired. It's fantastic stuff. And of course, Gene Ammons was the other guy at Prestige that was really capable of doing the Bossa Nova really well. So they gave both Willis and Jackson and Gene Ammons a Bossa session. This record also sold well for Prestige. And of course, we know Prestige was all about making money. So for them, making that choice was an easy day at the races. They had no qualms about that whatsoever. At Riverside, Cannonball Adderley makes one of the great Bossa Nova records of this time frame. There you see Rio, National Geographic looking picture kind of thing. With the Bossa Rio Sextet, Capitol also reissues this because he had just signed to Capitol. It's got a different cover, but you can find it in either way. I prefer this album cover, of course. Beautiful stuff. Cannonball's tone really fits the Bossa Nova really well. And then the last guy we got to talk about, kind of coming back full circle here, is Charlie Bird. And Charlie Bird has a series of records on his indie label. Riverside buys that contract out. The Bossa Nova thing explodes. And the next thing you know, Riverside has a whole bunch of Charlie Bird stuff, and a lot of it has a real Bossa Nova flavor to it. Some of it's very strong, like this one. I believe Charlie went to Brazil, and I think he was even the one who convinced Stan Getz to get involved with the Bossa Nova. But Charlie Bird's a wonderful player. Here's another one of his records on Riverside. This one's called Bossa Nova Pelos Pasa. I don't speak Spanish very well, so pardon my mispronunciation of some of that. So again, the Bossa Nova really swept across the entire field of jazz in a very short period of time. It was like a tsunami of sand and sun and coconut oil, and it was a fantastic time to be a jazz fan. So that covers the Bossa Nova. It shows you just how broad it impacted the entire industry, and the commercial viability of it. For me, it was in a way the last chapter of jazz as that commercial of a product. I got another question I want to answer today. Brian Shank asks, why were the record labels so much more important and influential on jazz musicians as compared to the blues or the rock labels? And that's a great question, Brian. It's something I feel like I've addressed in spurts at times, but for a number of reasons. One, because a record label's artist stable, these guys are all going to interact and play together. So that stable of musicians, that's a different entity than a group like Aerosmith or Boston, who they're the group and they have an entity and they're going to go from label to label, but they're still going to be Boston. They're still going to be excuse me, Aerosmith. A jazz musician is going to have to interact with the people on a specific label at a specific time. And so that's going to impact what you record, how you play, what it's going to sound like. And then the other thing that's really important here is that a lot of jazz is from black artists. And a black artist, opportunities are going to be limited. And so the labels that were willing to work with black artists had a great collection of these musicians coming into their stables, and it was that selection of how much risk are we willing to take that really helped shape a lot of these labels' legacy. And so if we're not hiring a lot of black musicians, that's going to impact the legacy of Capitol Jazz. If we're Blue Note and we hire a lot of black musicians, almost exclusively black musicians, that's also going to help shape our legacy and the sound of our sessions and how people perceive our label and how much risk that we're willing to take. The labels in jazz definitely impact the music. They impact the musician. They impact the sound of the sessions. And even who's going to be producing, engineering, and recording, all those things impact a jazz musician. And like I said, rock bands they're the unit, and they'll go from label to label, and maybe a different engineer or producer is going to change their sound on some level, but it's not the same as with the roving kind of changing membership of jazz recordings. I probably could have given that a better answer, but I'm at the end of 3 episodes here, so if that doesn't answer your question very well, Brian, message me again, and we'll talk about it more in person. But I appreciate you all for checking me out. Appreciate you all for watching the channel. Y'all be safe out there. Please subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Y'all be safe. Be blessed. Have a great day. Peace.